If you're like me and you enjoy riding trails on high-performing full suspension EMTBs, you probably haven't heard of Fitnord. At least I haven't. This is a Suomi Finnish brand that I believe, my impression is, they're not really making these frames themselves. These are sort of off-the-shelf Chinese frames. And yeah, there's a reason we don't really review these kinds of EMTBs often, or, well, this is the first one. And that's because these bikes usually aren't high-performance full suspension EMTBs. Even though this is a Finnish brand that is only available in like 2 or 3 Nordic countries, this might be of interest to everyone, because this isn't a unique bike in the sense that bikes like these can be found in most countries, I guess. Some brands buy Chinese bikes and put their own brand on it. But I think Fitnord has taken it a step further. Many random Chinese rebranded EMTBs, they're just sort of Alibaba bikes. Even though they got the same branding on it, they will have a wide variety of components, especially e-bike specific components. So that can be an issue when you're going back to the dealer to have the bike serviced or warranty repaired. They won't really know what kind of motor components is fitted to the bike. So chances are it can be difficult getting the bike fixed and getting the correct components. But Fitnord, they have taken ownership to these bikes. They got a motor that they've called Tech Drive. And Tech Drive, yeah, if I Google it, I can only find it on Fitnord bikes, but it appears to be the Ananda M81. So it's nice that they're taking some ownership to the components on the bike. And they tell us, if you have issues with your bike, bring it into the service, and the dealers will keep all the e-bike specific components in stock. So about the motor, 80 Newton meters. Ananda, well, it's the first time I've ridden an Ananda motor, but the reputation is they're sort of quite liberal with the Newton meter rating. I don't think 80 Newton meters is that far off on this motor though. It feels quite powerful, but it needs a bit of cadence to deliver the power. If you start from a standstill, mid-hill going up, it can be difficult getting going. You have to pedal at least more than half a rotation to get the motor to activate, and you have to keep pedaling more than a full rotation before the motor power kicks in properly. So it can be quite exhausting going uphill if there is a lot of stopping and starting again. If you manage to keep the pedals moving, you don't actually have to put any force into the rear wheel, you don't have to have any tension on the chain, but if you can keep them moving, the motor power is there on tap. So when you suddenly engage or when you suddenly push hard, the motor power is there instantly. So it's a bit of a technique riding this motor, but it's not difficult. And yeah, I learned it after like the second hill. Anyway, I'll talk more about the riding experience later. Looking at the Fitnord Ranger 700 FS components, yeah, as expected, this is a 3,000 euros bike weighing in at about 27 kilos, 3,000 euros retail price, and in these days with bike discounts, this can be quite a cheap bike, I expect. But yeah, you get the RST blade fork, 140mm travel. You get a DNM shock. They don't look that impressive just by looking at them. The RST fork has not got the rebound adjustment. So yeah, not great, but it's an air shock, I mean fork at least, so that's nice. And the Shock 2 has an air spring, and it has actually got rebound. And if you turn the rebound knob, it seems it makes a difference. So that's nice on this kind of entry-level components. Drivetrain and brakes are all by Shimano. I like the Deore 10-speed system, but this is the 1136 cassette. I wish they went with the Deore M6000 or similar to get the 1142 teeth cassette. You need a bit of lighter gears on a full suspension MTB. The MT200 brakes, yeah, they're quite basic, but at least they're well functioning as far as I have experienced. And the battery, 720 watt hours. Yeah, that's nice considering the price of this bike. And this is a mullet bike with a 29er up front and a 27.5 at the back, with 2.4 inches wide Maxxis Recon tires in what appears to be the dual compound harder rubber version. You even get a dropper seat post on this bike, and yeah, you don't really get that on all entry-level bikes, I think. Well, proper entry-level, 120mm travel, probably-ish. And while I've got my pointing device here, reflectors, and there's a torque disc behind there. We didn't bother taking them off for this test, but they didn't fall off, which is quite impressive. But I guess they will eventually if you ride this bike hard. 740mm handlebars. Yeah, they feel a bit narrow when you're used to riding 780, 800, but for this kind of bike, I got no complaints. This bike originally came with a kickstand, and we took it off immediately because we're scared of riding trails going fast with a kickstand that might suddenly open up. Also, it comes with a small headlamp included, and this is the first time I've seen on a full suspension MTB rack mounts up front, but I guess it makes sense. This bike sort of seems to be made for trekking, exploring, commuting, and having a rack is nice, and having a rack on the rear triangle, it will put a lot of stress on the joints and on the bearings, so it's, in that sense, it's nice having it up front. And then there's the geometry. There's a geometry table out on the FitNord website, and I'm not really sure I'd trust it because they claim 400mm chainstay, and that's quite short. And looking at this bike, looking at the gap between the back wheel and the center of the crank axle, yeah, this looks far longer. I'm getting about 480mm, and that's much longer. This bike only comes in two sizes, 43 centimeters, which most likely refers to the seat tube length, and the bigger one at like 48 centimeters. So if you're very tall or very short, chances are this bike might not fit you. For us, at just over 180 centimeters, riding this size 43, it fitted us quite well. And it's got a claimed wheelbase of 1220mm, and that sounds very short for a bike with such a long rear center. So we measured it. I think it's more like 1260, which is actually quite long, but again, the rear end, it means the wheelbase will be long. So I think it looks quite sorted. Not on the specs, not on the geometry table, but just from what I can measure. And the geometry table, it doesn't claim a single figure for degrees. So we don't know the C-tube angle, and we don't know the head angle. Just by looking at the bike, it seems okay. The effective seat angle, it doesn't look that short really. It seems way steeper than what used to be standard on those Chinese off-the-shelf frames at about 73.5 degrees. And the head angle too, actually, just judging by looks, it seems less than 66 degrees, I guess. Geometry, surprisingly, quite sorted. I supplied the geometry table, but I wouldn't really trust it. So, riding the bike. My expectations were quite low, to be honest. We took the bike on the trails to do a bit of climbing, and yeah, the Maxxis Recon tires, they're not super grippy, but on these dry conditions, they performed quite well. And I think they suit this bike and its intended purpose quite well. So going up steep hills, yeah, it actually performed very well. But as I mentioned, if you have to stop pedaling, just pause the pedaling for a fraction of a second or a few fractions. Then you will lose motor power and you will have to work quite a bit to get the bike going again. And considering the biggest cog on the cassette is only 36 teeth, that can make climbing quite a chore if you're not able to keep the motor going and pulling. So you have to basically pedal everywhere you go when climbing, or else you will come to a stop. But as long as you keep the cadence up, it's a nice and powerful motor really. And riding this bike alongside a mid-travel full power Shimano EP801 powered bike, we had no problems keeping up on the climbs, and in some occasions this bike cleared stuff the other bike didn't, and vice versa of course. I'm not going to call it a climbing specialist, but it climbs very well, and if it had a grippier rear tire and a bigger cog on the cassette or two, then it would be even better. Riding the flatter, flowier trails, it surprised us yet again really, because I've ridden entry-level full suspension EMTBs or hardtails before with like the Suntour XCR or the XCM fork, and they didn't really perform great at all. Going at some speed, the bike will shake so badly that it becomes difficult just seeing the trails. You get really hard impacts affecting your wrists and your shoulders, and at one occasion I actually had blurry vision after a prolonged descent. This bike though performs way better than that. The AirShock RST blade, it doesn't really completely give up. You never get those hard impacts taking out your wrist and shoulders like on the basic Suntour bikes. And the rear shock, by comparison, is even better. The adjustable rebound on the shock makes the rear end comparatively more settled. So on this bike, the rear end compared to the front end, it feels nice. Riding alongside that previously mentioned mid-travel Shimano EP8 powered bike, we really struggled to drop the Fit Nord on the easier, flatter trails. Okay, so far so good, but on the descents, on the higher speed, gnarlier descents, that's where you really will feel the limitations of this bike, and it shouldn't come as any surprise, but we had to try. The relatively flimsy rear tire, I mean, it's great for this bike, but for going downhill at some speed, yeah, it's a bit too flimsy, and there is little rebound dampening in the carcass of this tire. And when you've got a fork with it hasn't got adjustable rebound, and the rebound dampening, it seems to be set up quite lightly. So the front end will skip a bit and you will move sideways on the trails, and it can be challenging precisely positioning the front wheel between obstacles at speed. So approaching 40 kilometers per hour, and things are getting quite exciting, and we're not keeping up with that aforementioned mid-travel EMTB. I don't know if it's any point elaborating further. The point is, you can ride this bike on trails, and you can go at some speed, but if you're a trail riding enthusiast, this probably won't be the bike for you. There is a bit of creaking from the shock, I think. I didn't really investigate it that closely, but having this kind of entry-level suspension, you will, yeah, it's not uncommon. You will hear some noises, and that's how it is. So, to sum it up, it's a cheap bike, even though the retail price might sound a bit high. Around here, there's currently a 25% off campaign, and that makes this bike very inexpensive, yeah, compared to pretty much everything else. What you get is a bike that can be ridden on trails. It should be great for exploring, touring, commuting, offering lots of comfort for that kind of riding. And you can fit fenders and racks, and you get a bell, and you get a light, and yeah, and the kickstand. So not a trail rocket, but a well-performing full suspension bike at a decent cost. That's it. Appreciate any likes and subscribes. Thanks for watching.